Hello and welcome to the Life After Diets podcast. I'm Sarah Dosanjh, psychotherapist and author of the book I Can't Stop Eating.
And I'm Stephanie Michelle, binge recovery health coach. If you feel out of control around food, we get it because we've been there.
Thank you for joining our conversations about how to make peace with food and feel more comfortable in our bodies.
Now on to this week's episode. What's up? How you feeling?
Feeling all right.
Yeah.
How you feeling?
I'm having like a lot of moments where I think it's the weather, where I feel so happy. Just these little rushes of the world is all right. I know it has to do with the sunshine and that spring is arriving, but it's that's where I am right now.
I think I'm more I'm more up and down. I think I have those moments and then I have, oh no, everything's big and scary. I don't know what I'm doing with my life. There's been some big existential stuff as well.
Yeah, well, I feel like that's apropos for, just the moment in time you're in right now.
Yeah.
This is a great segue, actually.
This is what recovery looks like, people. This is what you've got to look forward to. People will say, what would you think about if you weren't thinking about food all the time? Oh, just the big existential questions of life.
Worse things.
Yeah, exactly.
I have a client in a group that I'm running, the binge recovery 12-week course. And she came to the session on Monday and said, I am not binging anymore. It's not an issue. I find myself able to be with food and it's like, it's just there. I'm not obsessed with it, she said. And I am now feeling really depressed because I don't know what else to think about. Like I don't have this stuff to fill my brain space and I don't know what to do with it. And so that was a whole thing. And I really resonated with that. The grief of losing this distraction, because I don't know how many people really think this. I guess our listeners can tell us, but there might be a good amount of people who have an idea that when I recover, I will feel happy. I will feel free. There will be ease. And all of that is true in my experience. But it is not all like that. And you are still the same person, essentially, with the same depth of feeling afterwards as you are in the beginning. And sometimes almost it kind of takes away a coping skill too. Coping tool, not skill, but coping tool. And yeah, that can actually leave you with more than you started with as far as what you have to figure out and all the things that we have to address outside of food even.
I think we've touched on this before, but it was a purpose. My life purpose was to fix this problem. And I think as well, because if ever I had a week or two, sometimes 3 weeks without binging and eating, quote unquote, what I would have called like really well, basically restricting, that was what I thought recovery was. And I would feel amazing for that time. So I think I thought that recovery was about feeling in control of food and feeling amazing about that. That was what I expected.
Yeah.
So actually my disappointment in recovery wasn't so much, I think, grieving the distraction of thinking about food all the time, but more arriving and going like, oh, like this is it. I also thought that I would just feel amazing about myself because I'd be like, I did this thing. Like I came out the other side. I'm a survivor. I conquered it. I don't know what I thought. I think I thought it was like conquering something. And that word just does not feel resonant at all to what the process or experience was like. And that's why I think this is an important subject to talk about. We don't mean to bum people out because I don't want to put anybody off this. Like, oh, well.
Well, I think it's because the approach is to deconstruct the idealized version of what recovery is rather than to talk about all that it really can be. And to the caveat, for me anyway, I don't feel that recovery is a huge disappointment. I do feel like it's been a wonderful thing and I am happier and I am more alive, I feel, than I was before. And that I will say that at the outset, but it is not all roses and it is not all highs in the way that I probably imagined a life free of food distress would be. I I think I've also mentioned this, that I thought that my food stuff was the cause of my depression and anxiety. And they certainly intersect, but I thought that if I figured food out, I wouldn't have reason to be depressed or anxious anymore. And that has not been true. I will say it has completely taken a different, you know what? I'm not going to say that. That's actually been a different version of recovery. My anxiety hit a really big peak after recovery, but I realized it wasn't to do with food. That wasn't the driving force there. It was certainly not helping matters, but it wasn't because of food, my distress with food. That was just a place where it lived. So that was an interesting thing for me to realize, that I would still be hit with these waves of feeling like that cloud, like really those commercials that have the cloud above your head that follows you everywhere, feels exactly what it feels like for me when I have depression. It like really feels like that. Just this blackness will still happen, and that anxiety still happens, and that life doesn't feel all put together, just because food isn't bothering me.
Mm-hmm. This idealized view of recovery is the very thing that I think can hold people back from recovery. Because for me, anything that wasn't that wasn't recovery. So I just felt like I was constantly failing at attaining, because not only when I got a handle on food, it was in my mind synonymous with I would get a handle on life.
Yeah.
And, if I was more quote unquote disciplined around food, I'd be more disciplined in life. I'd be this person who was more organized, more productive, more just everything, just more than what I was when I was in the food. So there was the initial disappointment, I think, of realizing that. And I guess it's a bit of grieving of this idealized self. And I went through it again. I think I mentioned this on one of our episodes as well. I went through it again from a career perspective, because I think I then transposed what I thought recovery was going to give me, how recovery was going to make me feel about myself, onto this work. I was like, gosh, if I'm the kind of person who's out there helping people to change their lives like that, then I'll feel like a particular kind of person, And then when I spoke at that Mac Nutrition conference, realizing, nothing I do from a career perspective, no piece of feedback that anybody gives me changes how I feel about me. And so it feels like a lesson that I learn over and over again. And I guess it comes back to this acceptance and realizing, actually, I'm okay. I think sometimes I thought recovery was going to be this transformational process of who I was at my core. And certain things did change and transform through it, but it was much slower, much more in line with that C.S. Lewis quote that I sometimes mention. Isn't it funny how day by day nothing seems to change, and then you look back and everything's different? For me, that's what recovery felt like. It was only when I looked back that I could see that I'd changed, and I was expecting to feel like I'd changed, but it was just so gradual.
Again, I think we're a little different. I feel like so much changed quickly. But I think that it changed for reasons that weren't just about recovery, but for what ended up coming about because of recovery. So it wasn't long after I'm going to use the word recovered, for lack of a better one. But it wasn't so shortly after recovery, COVID hit. And COVID allowed me to do things that I would not have done if COVID hadn't hit, and also if I hadn't been in recovery. So because I was recovering, I felt like I was exploring a lot more of my voice. I was really understanding what I thought. I was changing my relationships with my family, and particularly with my parents, and what I had always believed, because I think they believed. And I was realizing that there were so many things about me that weren't true, that I had been taught about myself, or I had just assumed about myself. So there was this whole revolution that sort of coincided with COVID, because I was also like, I'm going to put some of these things out there in the world. I started a social media account at that time. So lots changed, that I sometimes wonder if those pieces hadn't changed, would recovery feel a lot more blah to me. It's hard to know what recovery did and what COVID did and what the byproducts of recovery did. As far as I changed careers entirely. And I think that has been a major player in the way I do feel about myself and what the self-esteem that has come from doing something I want to do instead of what I thought I should do. I think recovery enabled that. But I think that there's that recovery itself, sometimes on days where I'm like just sitting on my couch, like doing the most I'm like, this isn't as exciting. This is really, I'm not riding this high all the time just because just because I'm not binging. But pulling these things apart is difficult. It's hard to talk about for me in a way that is like recovery specific versus all of the other ways in which my life changed after or during recovery for a multitude of reasons. I also want to talk about food itself, because I had a client say to me this morning on WhatsApp, she said, this is how my day went yesterday. I woke up and I was prepping my food to bring to work, and I had a good breakfast, and then I started to get this pain in my knee, and I didn't have those things I planned because I just couldn't walk around. And so I ended up just having some crackers and cheese and pepperoni slices. And then like later on, I just ended up grazing on some chocolate at work. And then at night I just threw together a whatever. And then I had some, she's like, so it wasn't really a great day. Now, this coming from someone who has been struggling with significant binges, and where something like that would begin, it would turn into what the hell, I messed up anyway. I might as well just keep going. So I'm listening to her message thinking that's coming. And she ends up saying, it wasn't a great day. This is what it looked like. And I'm thinking, are you kidding? That's a day. That's just what eating looks like. So I messaged her back and I was like, I have good news for you. I was like, this is just food. This is just how it looks. And this person I know to be someone who has this idea of, well, a good day should be a good day. It should be the day where I'm very conscious about food the whole time, and I have had what I've planned, and it's been on a plate, and I've been sitting down to eat it. And it looks like that intuitive eating, glorified into, this idea of what that is. And I said, it's not, I just want to tell you that I have days like that all the time. And I think that there's this idea, and I would have held it too, that it would have been a much more aligned, sort of like the best days that I have would be all the days that I have. Like there are some days that feel really great. Yes. And they're aligned with food, but I would have imagined that was baseline, as opposed to being days still look sometimes discombobulated. I think the difference is just that they don't turn into, I've ruined it. So now it might as well become this huge binge. And then I'm in the roller coaster of the big ups and the big downs. That's absent. But still there's some disorganization. There's just messiness that occurs just as much as the days that don't.
And I think it's an important point. I think it's also interesting that we're recording this episode while I'm in New York. And so back at home in the UK, I have my routine. I get up early. I always have a couple of hours before I start seeing clients. And during that time, I set my day up and I have my breakfast and I do my yoga, and I feel like I'm grounded. And it's not till coming here and being thrown out of my routine, whereby I'm starting work at 6:30 a.m. or 7 a.m. because a lot of my clients all my clients really run UK time. Having that thrown out has led to kind of confusion around food, and confusion because things taste different, confusion because my environment's different, my routine's different, and looking for that kind of grounding and familiarity in food. And this is what this happens as well in the UK, but it's more exaggerated now. I'm questioning, what does this mean when this is going on with food? What does this mean? Is this a red flag or a warning sign that I'm missing? And that leads me on high alert. So, for example, I just wanted to find somewhere that sold what I would call like a homemade cake, because the coffee shop nearby, I had one of their slices of lemon loaf, but it was clearly like the processed stuff out of a packet. And when I say a homemade cake, I mean the kind of cake you buy it and you have to eat it that day because it just tastes rubbish the next day. That's what I wanted, because I know that I enjoy it. It tastes better and I feel better when I'm eating those kinds of foods that I enjoy, and I'm eating them just because I enjoy them. That's what I want. That's really important to me, to have that. And we have that in our supermarkets in the UK, and I'm going in shops and I can't find anything. And I went to a place, I think I might have said this to you off the podcast. I saw on Google Maps a place called Brooklyn cupcakes. It had an award-winning tag. I was like, a cupcake. Yes, that's what I want. I'm going to walk up there and get coffee and a cupcake. I get to Brooklyn Cupcakes. Brooklyn Cupcakes doesn't sell cupcakes. Not just they've sold out, they do not sell cupcakes. They sell other cakes, they sell muffins or something like that. And I'm like, I'm furious that they don't sell cupcakes. I'm indignant, like, you know, that sort of self-righteous, angry indignation.
Yes.
And then I'm like, why am I having such strong emotions about a cupcake? What does that mean? You know, like that kind of questioning, and that makes me go like, is it okay that I'm having this strong a desire for cake? And the transition's been a bit trickier than I thought it was going to be. And actually, yes, for me, it is okay. It is giving me something emotional, but it's not in this kind of, oh, I want to go and eat all the cupcakes.
Right. But
for some reason, it's become quite important. And I guess there's still that questioning that goes on when people say, is recovery hard work? You know, is it a case that you're managing it and you have to think about this stuff constantly? No, but there are times in my life when things like this crop up and I'm like, oh, I'm having strong feelings about this food. And then that investigating of that. And it's not even like I'm finding out what it means. I get to decide what it means.
Yeah.
So it's not like there's some truth that I'm searching for. I can make it mean something else that I want it so much. I can make it mean, oh my goodness, like this is compulsive, this is all bad. And I could spiral into that. Or I can go like, actually, what is the most useful way of looking at what might be going on? And then that becomes the meaning. And I think sometimes we think something and we have to find out what it means, but sometimes meaning is a construct. And then there was one other time here where it was on a day I wasn't feeling well, I had a banging headache and I'd been in bed in the afternoon and I didn't have anything in to eat for dinner. And there's not the facilities to cook here either, which I was expecting. They didn't even have plates. I had to ask for a plate. They just had bowls. And so I went on Uber Eats thinking, oh, I'm in New York. There's going to be amazing options on Uber Eats. And I saw an Italian restaurant and I thought, oh yeah, I feel like that. Something like pasta that's just going to be grounding and dense in my stomach. I thought that's what I really want. And I put the pasta in the basket. And by the time all the fees and the tax and everything had gone up, it came to $34. You're not shocked, but like no. I was, it's like, that's 30 quid to have some what's probably mediocre pasta delivered. Just psychologically, it's not like that's going to completely break the bank. And I can afford to spend that on my dinner, but psychologically I couldn't do it. No, I'm not doing that because it might even be rubbish. And then I spent 34. I'm not being disappointed with my dinner for $34. And then I was stressed. So I'm looking and I'm stressed and I'm hungry and I don't know what to do and everything's expensive and I'm annoyed. And so I ended up ordering a McDonald's for $20. And I thought, at least I know what I'm getting.
Yeah.
It's chicken nugget meal. I know what I'm getting. I know what it's going to taste like. I know how it's going to feel. And so I was seeking that familiarity, and $20 still felt like a lot of money to get a McDonald's delivered.
Yes.
But it was still almost half of getting the pasta delivered. But I was conscious that I actually did enjoy the McDonald's, to be fair. I haven't had a McDonald's for a long time. And I was like, actually, I feel quite good. But there was a whole thing, especially when the McDonald's was being delivered, where I was like, that was a stress decision. Like, what does that mean that, you know, that I went through that I'm getting myself so worked up about dinner? Would I have got myself so worked up if I didn't have a history of an eating disorder? I don't know.
Maybe not. But to me, recovery is exactly that. It is not the fact that you had the stress, because perhaps for someone who has a history of this, food is the vehicle. It is the translator of stress or whatever the emotion is. I'm okay with that. If that's for the rest of my life, food is a place where I put emotional energy. Sometimes I'm okay with that. It's what I do with it. It's the point about the meaning making and the decision around that. Because outside of recovery, what I would have done, is that would have become a whole story. It would have become a catastrophe. It would have snowballed into more than that. And what I resonate with this. And when I find myself in a situation like that, it is like, what is the freedom in recovery is my ability to be like, meh, and then to just keep moving, right? Like There is not an energy that extends beyond that. I'm not going to carry that into my next day. It doesn't mean more than it meant in that moment. And I can see it for what it is. To me, that is freedom, that separation from the story and from the pathology of that whole thing. The same thing happened to me yesterday, as I shared in the podcast last week, with the Cadbury eggs that I had left over. And I had a plastic bag of them. This was my stash because my kids, yeah. So, and it's a clear plastic bag. You can see them all in there. And to my point about those little things like that, little chocolates, like there's something so lovely about it. And so I needed some chocolate after lunch, and I was coming in. It was just before a call, and I grabbed a handful of those Cadbury eggs that were in my hand, and I put the rest back, and I came in my office and I ate them. And when I was done, I was like, I want more. And I'd had enough, I think, physically, but I was in it, I was kind of like, no, I'm not done. I need more. And so I went back, took another handful, realized that left about 5. And I was like, might as well just finish them, and did. And then threw the bag away. And as I was doing this, I was like, this could be that whole thing. Like there's this muscle memory of might as well just finish the bag. Why do I need more than a handful? Like that was actually enough. Why do I need so much chocolate today? And then it's like, And, it's just sort of like, I just see all of that. And this is the difference. This right here is the difference. It's like what I do with it after that. It's I needed extra chocolate today. And I didn't want to put 5 back. So I just had the rest because it didn't bother me to do so. I'm not overly full. It's fine. And it doesn't mean anything. And I haven't thought about that until we talk about it here. Like that's to me what recovery, that's the bonus of recovery, but it's not that perfection exists in the food itself or even the mental space around the food itself. It's just that it doesn't take over. Mm-hmm. And I'll take that. To me, that is well worth it. This is what I did it for, but not that it looks perfect or that you don't have moments of stress around food.
And the problem with the black and white thinking, when I think of those kinds of moments now, back then when I was trying to recover and stop binging, it would be those moments that would tip me over into a binge. Exactly. That would trigger the all or nothing. I've blown it thinking, oh, I finished all the mini eggs and I'm out of control and I wasn't going to eat them. So now I'm just going to eat everything today and do better tomorrow. Like that was the cycle that would fall back into.
Right.
That's what recovery is. I guess it's having those moments where food doesn't necessarily feel perfectly regulated. You feel a bit off balance, but you rebalance. Instead of the overcorrecting, like you used like a balance board example.
My marble in the middle.
Marble in the middle, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's the attempt to overcorrect that actually causes more binging.
Right. And more stress.
Mm.
It just regulates further. That's why we often talk about, it's not focusing on the food itself, focusing on those moments. Even with body image, I'll talk about it like that, where it's not about not having the thoughts or the flood or the upset. It's what happens next. How might that completely dysregulate us and throw us into further chaos? To me, recovery is a different way of meeting that, so that you get your marble back in the middle much faster. And yesterday I posted on Instagram about what it might look like to feel safer around food. And then in a subscriber post, I posted what it might look like to feel like your nervous system is regulating. And so much of it was about X, Y, and Z happens, but it ends more quickly, and blah, blah, blah happens and it ends more quickly. Blah, blah, blah still happens, but it ends more quickly. And I think that's part of to me what that's the freedom, is that it doesn't take over. I think that's a really important point I want to make sure we get in on this episode. So now we can move on to other parts, other angles of the conversation, but that one feels really big.
The whole skill to learn in recovery is learning how to recover in a moment, because recovery is being seen as this destination that you arrive at. Oh, here I am in recovery land. That's it. Never have to think about food again. But I guess there's a couple of skills that you're learning. One is figuring out how to think about food in a non-stressful way. And 2, how to recover from stress, conflict, brief moments where you might feel a bit out of control. And what I mean by that is that it doesn't feel like that choice was really conscious. It's done. And then afterwards you're like, Thinking about it now, that's not what I would have chosen. It doesn't feel like a choice.
Yeah.
And I would still have moments like that, but they're brief and they're not a binge.
Yeah.
If you want connection and support around any of the topics we talk about on the podcast, we would love for you to join our membership community.
Members have access to monthly online support groups, a private Facebook group, live episode recordings, and member-only Q&As.
If you would like to join us, please head to lifeafterdietspodcast.com/community.
Now let's get back to the episode. I would say the same applies when we're talking about what recovery looks like from a body image perspective. I don't know what your thoughts on that would be, but it's pretty much exactly the same as with the food. It's not the absence of feeling feelings about my body at times. It's being able to handle them. And I will also say that outside of recovery, it would have been much more consistent. And I feel like there's actually times where I have I actually feel neutrality. In the same way that I have days that feel really great with food and really regulated and really aligned. And then there's also days that aren't. I had a client say to me earlier in the week that coming out of the shower, she saw herself in the mirror. We've been working together since August. So it's almost a year, not quite, maybe 3/4 of a year. And body image has been one of the angles, one of the things we've been working on. And she came out of the shower and saw herself and had a thought in her mind where she looked at her body and thought, like, this is my home. And she's like, I didn't mean to think it. It just came up. It just was this thought that happened. She's like, and then it passed. But I think that body image healing is having access to moments like that don't have to stay, but they come around. And there's some window into feeling like that sometimes that, again, is worth it. I think that to even have moments where you feel any sense of connection to yourself in that way is really nice. But I don't know. Do we even know anybody who is there really even anyone who feels, who lives in that state of, I don't want to say perfection because we know the answer to that is no, but something closer to it where it's just a lot of joy a lot of the time. Does this exist anywhere?
When I was in the police, we had to do a welfare check on this elderly lady. And we went round there and she was telling us about her husband who was at work at the post office and he was on his way home. He wasn't. He died 5 years earlier and she had some kind of dementia or something. But she was so happy. And I had this conversation with someone else who was a nurse. They've met people with dementia where it's like some people with dementia, there's a lot of paranoia and fear. And
yes.
There's that darker side of it. But some people, their brains change in some way. And it's like the happy switch is just flipped. And they're just happy all the time. And I remember at the time looking at it going like, I'd be all right getting like that. If I could, as long as I could be one like you, just happy all the time, then it would be fine.
So the answer is those with dementia. Yeah. This is where we find it.
But if we think that a change in the brain could cause that, then I think there possibly are some people who may be born with a happy brain. Like this idea that we have our baseline, and some people might have a naturally higher baseline.
Yeah.
But I think the majority, I mean, certainly the people I meet, it's pretty up and down.
Not for everyone. I feel like there's people in my life who I would, against my logical knowing, I'm like, they're good to go. Like they live a life that is, I think they're happy all the time. They have good self-confidence all the time. But then the more you learn about somebody, the more you realize that I just have never found it to be true when you get behind the scenes on someone. And it might be true. For example, I'm thinking of someone in particular who I went to college with who doesn't struggle with certain things that I do. So when I look at them, I'm looking at that angle of things and I'm like, she doesn't struggle. I was like, yes, she's struggling with the things that you're not struggling with. You know what I mean? Like her stuff is not my stuff. So I'm not even paying attention to that. And I'm thinking, yeah, but that's no big deal. Like that's easy, but it's easy for me. Like those aren't issues I deal with, but for someone else it is. And I think we all have, I think this is just humanness. We all have something. I think it's true that there are people with baselines that might lean more optimistic or lean more happy than others. And that is also true. But I don't think that I think we often are idealizing so much. And I think I mentioned this too, that there's maybe that we have to imagine that there is some kind of place to go, that there's this sense of pursuit of something greater that's what religion is and things like that. But in reality, I think we come closer. And I suppose that's what the point of this episode is to, it's just two humans hosting a podcast, not living a life much different than you. I mean, I don't want to say that either. I don't want to minimize the struggle of disorder, because I certainly would have taken this over that any day. But it's not Eden.
Yeah, you could say that recovery is just less suffering.
Yeah.
Bit of a glass half empty way of looking at it, but it's like you'll suffer less. Like it'll just be the regular life suffering. It won't be this on top of it too.
Yes.
I think the idea being that for me, okay, if I fix my eating disorder, then I will be rewarded with this, with a smaller body, with this being this kind of way. And actually the reward for getting out of the eating disorder is getting out of the eating disorder. That's the reward. And it's the one and only reward, really. I mean, there's all the things that are attached to that, of course, around identity and self. To imagine that recovery then gives you love or, something else, like these bigger things that perhaps many of us yearn for, is a belief or an idea that just doesn't help you get closer to recovery.
I actually think this is really hopeful to talk about it in this way, because it can seem like such a huge life-altering expectation that, recovery means that I must become this version of myself that seems so far away. And it's actually probably closer than you think, because it really doesn't involve perfecting anything or being more than it is. Can be part of the grief of it too, when you get there and realize that it didn't give you love or some of the other promises that maybe we wish it would. We've been hoping for so long, so many years, that it would. You could look at that glass half full, half empty, however you like, whatever serves you now.
I've spoken about it this way in the past, and some people seem to really resonate with speaking about it this way. And it actually helped me, even though it kind of turns it into a binary concept. It's not a perfect way of looking at it. And that's the idea that there being two states. So there's the state of the chaos with food, and then there's the recovered state. And any time that you are at peace with food, that you are okay, even if it's sort of this respite for a bit, thinking about it is like you are in the recovered state. And then perhaps things get dysregulated again, you slip back into the disordered eating behaviors, then you're kind of back in the chaos. And I was talking about it sort of state A and state B. Rather than looking at it as a linear journey, it's often, certainly for me, really in that last kind of year of recovery, felt like just bouncing between two states. And at what point am I allowed to then call myself recovered? And I found that thinking just wasn't helpful to me. Like you said, the other week, like my recovery was much more gradual. So I would think of it as, okay, I'm behaving in a recovered way around food. I'm feeling mentally and emotionally in a recovered way around food. I am recovered. I may slip out of recovery, but the task is to come back, because when I thought about it, it's like moving between two places rather than moving back and forth on this journey to get somewhere. It then became much easier for me to figure out how to get myself out of the chaos back into feeling regulated, calm, and free with food again. And then what happened was it was then more and more time in the recovered state again, for want of a better word, in state A, until that's then started to feel more like my default.
You're right.
So sometimes thinking about it as states rather than a place or a linear journey, even though the linear journeys are often shown as like squiggles, it's still getting from A to B. And I think for a lot of people, there's a bouncing back and forth between A and B. But then it means like every time that you are struggling again, you think you've gone backwards if you don't have like a shift in how you think about that. And every time you're back in the disordered eating, great, this is an opportunity to practice that skill of knowing how to pull yourself out of that. And put yourself back over here. Because when you can do that, that's when you can have trust in yourself. Because if the binge urges come back or chaos comes again, it's like, it's okay. I've done this so many times. This is what happens. I just have to figure out how to lift myself up and move myself towards that.
Yes. I think this is one of the most helpful concepts that you offer. That description of the states and the nonlinear, just the way that you reframe that. And I also want to add that, like, that journey back, from state A to state B, knowing how to do that is something that comes with time. too, right? Because to your point about eventually state B, I don't know how you think of it, but one of the states becomes your new a default. I think for someone inside of recovery, it can feel so foreign and so unreliable, to be inside of that state, that it's just easier to be in state A. But over time, and in the practice of moving from A to B, I just think it's so hard to conceptualize when you haven't done that, when that's not accessible very much. But the more slow and steady, like that switching into that state and the pathway that your brain starts to understand about how to get there, the more it does that, the more you can rely. You're like, oh right, no, I know how, I know the way, or I can feel the way. It's more reliable. It's more reliable. I trust it more. I feel safer with that more and more and more. But there's such a time element to that. You can't necessarily will your way or work harder at recovery, to condense it into a smaller, you can't get more done too fast. It's like, it has to have time for your brain to really understand it and live there a while and learn it. Only time can offer that, I think. Which again is hopeful because it's like, you don't have to necessarily scramble so hard and work harder. It's just more like allow time to do its job. The more that you're working on this in a consistent way, that starts to pay dividends just by nature of it being more available more of the time.
If a client turns up at a session and says, oh, I've had a week where food has just felt really easy and I felt really free, and I'm imagining like this is what recovery looks like. In that moment, what I'm doing with them is really getting them to cement and talk about it and understand, how are you feeling? How are you thinking about food? How are you making decisions? What is the structure and routine around your food? Because exactly that, like, it needs to become more and more familiar. So, because when you're back in the chaos, it's very easy to completely forget how that looks and feels and what you're normally doing. So like the overcorrecting is happening.
Or to invalidate it.
Yeah.
Like it didn't mean anything.
Yeah.
Right. So you like prime your brain because your brain it's biased towards remembering what's wrong, or what's not right. And so, to prime your brain to sort of like feel that. So it does familiarize itself with that more on purpose. I think we have to be a little more on purpose about it. Do you ever get, do you ever go back into state A for like a second and be like, oh no,
state B? You're doing it because confuse me.
You do it the other way. Okay, I'm sorry.
Well, it kind of makes sense to get from A to B, but that's a little bit more like the journey thing. Yeah. So it's actually like B, I think of as chaos, and A, I think of as...
Oh, I thought of A because it came first.
Yeah. Well, did it though?
I know. Okay.
I'm not born with disordered eating.
This is true. It feels like the first frontier in my mind.
Well, it's exactly that. It's in those moments that I described earlier where I'm running around New York trying to find a cupcake, and it seems so important. Oh my goodness, it's coming. Like there is that moment of the tension. It's like, okay, it's all right.
Yeah, exactly. And I want to highlight that because I do too. Like there are times where I'm like, all of a sudden, it's because I almost sometimes forget about how it felt. And then when I have an insight into it, sometimes, like, especially if I'm in bed and I'm like being in my depressive place, and then I'm like, oh yeah, oh no, like here it is, it's coming. And I feel so scared. And then I'm like, talk myself down, like come back to my present moment. Like, oh, right. My brain knows other things now. Right. But it is scary. And I just want to say that I still feel that sometimes where I'm like, do I know nothing? Have I lost everything?
Oh, I take it a step further, Steph. In my mind, I'm playing out having to have a conversation with you that I have to stop doing the podcast because I've relapsed. And then you trying to coach me out of it.
Yeah. Relatable.
It's just an association with certain feelings. Yeah. So even feeling ill, and the day I ordered the McDonald's I was not feeling well. Even feeling ill in bed, watching something on my laptop and eating McDonald's felt like, oh, is this okay? Am I just gonna, is this me now? I'm just the person who is in bed ordering McDonald's over and over and over and over again. That's the, because I was so miserable as well. The capacity of perspective wasn't there. And now even when I don't have perspective, a lot of the time I can see that I don't have perspective,
Mhm.
even if I can't quite pull myself out of it yet.
Yes.
So I can sort of ride through it a bit and be like, okay, like,
Yes.
you've got time to figure this out. You don't have to decide in this moment whether you've just ruined your life.
Right. Exactly. You
Wait
let
and
that
see.
flood pass. I feel now that we're maybe more on the same page than we've ever been.
Okay.
I hope that gives you some insight into, I don't know, what it's like, really.
Yeah. It's about one, being realistic, watching that your own expectations aren't tripping you up, because your expectations of what recovery is could be the very thing that keeps you further away from it. And that's probably what I would be asking people to think about off the back of this episode.
I don't know if anyone else has noticed, but I feel like, Sarah, your voice is so calm and collected today.
Is it?
Yeah.
Is it not just my microphone?
Maybe, but I feel like I'm like doing my talking and you're like, and then when you're calm and collected, like, like you're this voice of like, and I feel like I have to listen to you.
I noticed actually in this episode and last week's episode, I thought you were talking slower, and I wondered if that was deliberate.
Not at all. I feel like I'm talking quickly, but
No, especially last week's episode.
Excellent.
That we recorded earlier today.
That's lovely.
It sounds weird to
I knew
say
what you
last
meant.
week's episode.
It was just an hour ago.
Yeah.
That's nice to hear.
Yeah, look out for it in the edit.
Okay.
Thanks for listening, everyone, and thanks for listening to me, Steph.
You're welcome. We'll see you next week.
See you next week.
Goodbye.